So in module 4, now we're going to go ahead and see how the boys fared over in gender expectations throughout American history. And as we have talked about with traditional cultures, boys tend to have a broader kind of leeway in their socialization, not so much with the family. And of course, their job opportunities and other things are much broader than what women are over the history. So let's look a little more detail. And your book talks about three manhood transformations. In other words, the view of manhood. And remember, manhood is viewed as something that is obtained through trial and kind of challenge as opposed to womanhood. And so these are kind of the standards that we see over time in the US. So back in the 17th and 18th centuries, which was more colonial American, the focus of gender role expectations for adolescents boys was really on preparing to assume adult role responsibilities in both work and marriage. And so you saw a lot of like apprenticeships where boys would work with master craftsmen or others who were particularly skilled. They would learn those skills and then they would go on and contribute to their community. And so, as we've talked about, like back in chapter 4, when we talked about cultural beliefs, kind of the 17th to 18th century, the United States was a very communal society. So, boys, and as they grew into men, were expected to really contribute to their society as well as to prove themselves. Now, this is going to change into what's referred to as the self made man, and that's in the 19th century. So, at this point, males are increasingly expected to become independent from families in adolescence and emerging adulthood. So, once again, you're just beginning to see the breakaway from the 17th, 18th century kind of communal viewpoint. And now you're seeing it more into this self made man kind of idea. And so the expectation is to become a man, you need to learn self control and self denial. And that's part of becoming a man, to control your emotions, to be able to control the situation. And they even referred to something called the decision of character. And it was a popular term at the time to describe passage of young men from being kind of high spirited but undisciplined youths or boys to manhood, which was characterized by this self control and strong will for carrying out independent decisions. In other words, being the one in charge. And you see a little of that carry through even into the 20th century, which is where you see the idea of passionate manhood. And passionate manhood is a kind of unlocking of the self made manhood of the 19th century. And by that, what I mean is that it's much more acceptable for men to be able to be out of control in a way that they're displaying their emotions like anger and sexual desire. And that was much more viewed favorably than it had in the earlier era of the 19th century. And so, even to this day, we see some of that, right? Now, there's certainly a movement away from the sexual desire with events like the Me Too movement and a lot more public awareness of some of these issues, maybe highlighted more in the 1920s to 1950s kind of period. Currently, and then so self expression and self enjoyment kind of replace that self control and self denial. And so you see kind of more the liberation of more of what's kind of bubbling underneath than there had been before. Now, currently, we see a much more egalitarian gender attitude. So, in other words, the view of equals and that men and women are equal and that each have their equal type of rights. And so, men should not be encroaching upon that with like their sexual desires or, in the way of dominating others and stuff that maybe was more acceptable as kind of that gendered stereotype and expectation of manhood in the past. Okay, so What we're going to do next is look at Module 5, which looks at socialization and gender in the West. And so we're kind of up to current day. So you have, up to this point in this chapter, a view of more traditional cultures, and then the view of how the United States has morphed over the years from a more traditional culture into what we have today. So stay tuned for Module 5 on more of the socialization and gender for today.